absolutely gorgeous. Making the drive in. We landed in Savannah a little bit later than we wanted to, so sorry for the delay, but thank you to everyone from Savannah who just cheered. And drove for a quick meeting with folks who are really interested in immigration issues in Yucatan, with the editors of La Isla magazine, reading about issues in both English and Spanish, talking about the importance of immigrants and immigration, not just to places where you might expect it if you're from Texas, like my hometown of El Paso, but here in South Carolina, making the state so great, so strong, and so proud. And then making the drive in here and absolutely gorgeous. You have all this green stuff, these trees and grass. Cynthia, who's my greetings from El Paso, said it is a jungle here. We bring you greetings from our hometown of El Paso, Texas, which is in the middle of the Chihuahuan Desert. Yes, there's some El Pasoans here as well. Good to see you all. Met some Texas Western College, now University of Texas at El Paso, minor alumni here today. So we say picks up to all of our UTEP alums, go Miners. But I gotta tell you, so much of what you are hearing, for those of you not from El Paso and not from my part of the world, about our community, from those who hold the highest positions of public trust right now, are so at odds with the community that I was raised in, that I grew up in, and that Amy and I are now raising our 3 kids. Ulysses, who's 12 years old, Molly, who's 10, Henry, who's 8, all of whom attend the same world-class public schools that I got to go to when I was a little kid there. And speaking of living in 2 worlds, being able to speak 2 languages, they're going to this extraordinary dual language program at Mesita Elementary, where today they're learning math in Spanish. Monday they'll be learning math in English. They're not just speaking and writing and listening and reading in both languages. They are computing, they are existing, they're living in both worlds. They're making the most of a community that is 1/2 of the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere. From the tip of Patagonia to the Arctic Circle, no 2 countries come together in the way that Mexico and the United States do, like they do in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. 3 million from 2 countries, speaking 2 languages, 2 cultures, 2 histories, joined, not separated, by the Rio Grande River, forming something far greater, more powerful, more magical, I would say, than the sum of the parts or the people involved. And check this out. For nearly 20 years running, El Paso, Texas has been one of the safest cities in the United States of America. And as you probably know, that is safe, not despite the fact that we are a city of immigrants. 1/4 of those with whom we live were born somewhere else, chose us, left their hometowns, their language, their culture, their country, their traditions to start anew, to do better for themselves and for their kids, but also it is clear to do better for all of us. And they have their very presence makes us stronger, more successful, and yes, safer and more secure. Decimos que si queremos asegurar nuestras comunidades, necesitamos tratar cada persona con respeto y dignidad. Y así podemos asegurar El Paso, Bluffton, South Carolina, Texas, y este país de los Estados Unidos. If we want security, you will not purchase it with a $30 billion, 30-foot high, 2,000-mile wall. You'll be able to do so by treating people with respect, with dignity. And this is not Beto O'Rourke or a Democrat telling you this. When I listen to my county sheriff in El Paso, Texas, our chief of police, those entrusted with serving and protecting the community, they tell me that when those who live in a given town are afraid to come forward to law enforcement for fear of their immigration status, they also now are afraid to report a crime, to serve as a witness, to testify in a trial. We are demonstrably less safe when we fear one another. And we've got somebody in power today who will hold his purchase on power by seeking to keep us apart or angry or afraid of one another. That's why he calls Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals, because we know the facts fly in the face of that very hateful rhetoric. Mexican immigrants, in fact, commit violent crimes at a lower rate than those born in this country. So, whether it is trying to make us scared of Mexican immigrants or Muslims whose travel to the United States he sought to ban, or by calling Nazis and white supremacists and Klansmen very fine people, what he is trying to do is to keep us divided and apart, because I think he understands. This guy, in some ways, is an absolute genius at understanding politics and what motivates us in a democracy. And he understands that if we transcend those differences of our race, of our ethnicity, of our geography, of the number of generations that you can count your family history here in South Carolina, or whether you just got here this morning, if we can come together as a country at this very divided, highly polarized, hyper-partisan moment, there is nothing, absolutely nothing that can stop us. If we want to make sure anything that we want to do is possible if we come together and set our minds to it. In this country, time and again for the last 243 years and counting has proven that to be true. It's not always easy. We don't always get there as quickly as we want to. Sometimes it is frustratingly slow. But to paraphrase Winston Churchill, one of the great leaders of the 20th century, as frustrating as it might be, as slow as the process is, it is the best thing under the sun. This democracy, the single greatest mechanism to call forth the genius, the power, the resolve, the creativity, and yes, the service and the sacrifice of an entire nation. We go back to World War II, meeting one of the greatest threats the world and certainly the Western democracies had ever faced. And it was young men and women, leaders from this community, who put their lives on the line and gave their lives in service to this country, really to the future of mankind, made this world safe for democracy, not just in the 1940s, but for the following 75 years and counting. If we want to meet the challenges before us, in a country where so many millions of our fellow Americans cannot see a doctor, cannot afford their prescription medication, cannot take their child to a therapist so that she's well enough to learn at the next day of school, if we really want to achieve universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care, we cannot meet that challenge by half measure or by half the country. It's all of us coming together to make it so. If we want to meet a challenge, we're more than 1 million young Americans who we call dreamers, who came to this country at a very young age, who probably do not speak the language in their country of origin, no longer have family. But if we follow through with the threat of deporting them there and they are successful against those long odds, they'll be successful in that place, in that country, not here in South Carolina, not here in the United States of America. If we want to realize that service and sacrifice and a definition of an American come in so many different shapes and sizes and forms and walks of life and life experiences, and that not only are those dreamers being taught by those world-class public school teachers, very often they are those world-class public school teachers. And not only are their lives being protected by the lives of our fellow Americans who put their lives on the line, where they are tonight in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, and Yemen, and Somalia, and Libya. So often, It is the dreamers themselves who have their lives on the line and are serving in our armed forces all over the world. There's a gentleman named Marcelino Serna, lived in my hometown of El Paso, Texas, came across the border, undocumented. Today we call him a dreamer. More than 100 years ago, like any human being, was fleeing maybe crushing poverty or violence or looking for a better life and came to this country. And when we entered the First World War, Marcelino Serna entered the United States Army. And when his drill sergeant said, "Serna, look, we looked at the records, you're not a citizen, you don't have to fight this battle. Every single man from this unit is going to France. But we can guarantee you that not every single one of them will be returning home, at least not alive." And Serna said, "No, this is my country, this is my fight," and off we go. Serna came back from World War I, the most highly decorated veteran from the state of Texas. Brought back honor and distinction to our community, to this country. And check this out. At a time that we were proposing to build this 2,000-mile wall, my hometown just dedicated an international bridge connecting us with Juarez, and we named it after Marcelino Serna to remind us of who we are at our best. So, if we're going to follow that example and this great tradition of service from people who chose us, chose to be Americans to come to this country, then let us make every single dreamer a U.S. citizen to free them forever from any fear of deportation back to a country they do not know. Allow them to be successful here. Contribute to our greatness, not anybody else's. But we're going to have to do that together. If we want to meet the challenge of an economy that works far too well for too few and not at all for too many, the greatest levels of both income and wealth inequality that we've seen in the lifetimes of anyone in this gymnasium here today. You'd have to go back to the last Gilded Age to find this concentration of wealth, power, and privilege that makes it so hard for too many to make their way in this country, to provide for their kids, to be able to see themselves in the future of the United States of America. And one of those bold, progressive champions who responded to the last period of inequality, a Republican at that, Theodore Roosevelt, said, "If you want to achieve anything resembling political democracy in the United States of America, then you must vigorously pursue economic democracy in the United States of America. Everyone must be able to work hard and get ahead and do well." And when I think about the fact, as a parent of 3 kids in public schools, that so many of our educators, the teacher in the classroom, the counselor, the librarian, the nurse, the cafeteria worker, the school bus driver, the custodian, are working 2 and 3 jobs in this country just to make ends meet, when they have the most important job in front of them, that child whose lifelong love of learning, once unlocked, makes that kid unstoppable, makes the United States unbeatable. I want that teacher, that educator, to just have one job. I want to pay her a living wage so she can focus on that classroom and on those kids. I thought it was bad in Texas, where nearly 50% of our educators are working a second or a third job to make ends meet, where I met parents when I was going door to door in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas, who told me they are going to ensure, given everything that they've sacrificed for their kids, all the love that they put into them, the loans that they're taking out so that they can go to college, that they do not enter the profession of teaching because they worry about their ability to take care of themselves, to respond to the pressure of high stakes, high-pressure standardized tests that in no way effectively measure that teacher's performance in the classroom. They worry about a teacher retirement system in the state of Texas that has not paid a cost of living adjustment in 13 years and just doubled the cost of health care for retired teachers in a state like yours that failed to expand Medicaid. But then, when I listen to public school educators here in your state. And I learned that fully 1/4 of new teachers drop out of the profession in their first year. I mean, think about that. Everything that we invested in that teacher's education when she was going to pre-K through 12, when he was going to college and had federally subsidized student loans, the grants, the scholarships, the help that we provided to them, they get to the classroom, they're finally able to answer that calling, and then within a year, they are gone. And the opportunity cost, everything that we put into their education and their success, all of that now is lost to us and lost to those children in that classroom who no longer have an educator or are crammed into bigger and bigger classes where less and less attention is paid to each child. We learned that, Chris, what is the fact that within 5 years, nearly 50% of new teachers in the state of South Carolina drop out of the profession? Why is this happening? Well, one of the things that I've learned, we have $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt in this country. So many of those educators took on so much debt, we're not paying them enough to put food on the table, meet the note on the mortgage, and pay back the student loan debt. So they are dropping out of education to find more remunerative work in some other field, and all of us lose out. So in addition, además, in addition to paying teachers more so that they can focus on that one job, in addition to fixing the state teachers retirement system in Texas and in South Carolina, in addition to making sure that teachers who taught for 26 or 28 years are not penalized with an arbitrary cap that forces them to go to other states and share their genius and talent with someone else instead of that kid here in South Carolina. We need to make sure that we wipe clean your student loan debt if you commit yourself to public education. I don't want you to worry about paying that back. I want you to stay in that classroom and do well. But I know better than to think that any one person or any one political party can make that happen. I know it's going to have to be this country coming together. That point driven home to me, listening to fired up, ticked off Republican school teachers in Texas who warned me, Beto, if you allow Betsy DeVos to take my public tax dollars out of my classroom, turn it into a voucher, send it to a private school at the expense of those kids for whom I've already sacrificed so much, mark my words, she told me, I will hunt you down and I will find you and I will hold you accountable. Republicans, Democrats, independents alike, we have found common cause. This is the common ground from which we can work to ensure that we have a world-class education for every child, and we take care of our public school educators like the world-class asset that they are to this country. Let's do that together. And then, for the very youngest among us especially, I want to make sure that you know that I hear the scientists loud and clear that the 1 degree Celsius warming that we have seen in this planet just since 1980 over the pre-industrial revolution levels has been in part the cause for the floods that we see along the Missouri River, in Charleston, in my home state, in Houston, Texas, where 58 inches of rain fell from the sky just 2 years ago, the landfall record for as long as we've been keeping records in North America, and that was the third 500-year flood in just 5 years. Folks had not finished rebuilding their homes from the last one before they got hit again. And not only are they paying to rebuild, you here are paying to rebuild their homes there, or to rebuild in New York or New Jersey, or to rebuild in South Carolina or Nebraska, Missouri, and Iowa after these last floods. To rebuild communities in California that has seen the worst devastation from wildfires since we've been keeping track of wildfires. These droughts, these floods, this devastation, these fires, these deaths we are seeing all over the world right now are not visited upon us solely by God or by nature.
We have had a hand in this. It has been our omissions, in our excesses, in our inaction, in the face of what we know to be true. But those scientists tell us that there is still a decade left to us. All of humankind. I could care less your party affiliation, or who you love, or to whom you pray, or how long you've been here. This is very real right now, and it's on all of us. If we do literally everything we can in the time left to us, we can perhaps keep this planet from warming 2 degrees total over those pre-industrial revolution levels, because the scientists tell us after that, it gets progressively, maybe even geometrically worse for our kids and our grandkids and the generations who will succeed them. If you are worried about 400,000 apprehensions on our southern border last year, some of them, by the way, fleeing historic droughts in the northern triangle of Central America, then just imagine what it will be like when some countries in the Western Hemisphere can no longer support human life, because that's exactly where we are headed right now. But if we make the decision that we will free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, invest in renewable energy technology, understanding that's also where we are creating jobs in America today, the 2 fastest growing jobs, wind and solar in the United States of America. If we bring rural communities, farmers who can plant cover crops, use precision tilling and farming, free up markets to allow them to capture carbon out of the air, do their part as they grow the food and fiber that sustains and clothes not just America, but so much of the rest of the world. If we do all of that and then reassert our leadership on the global stage, right now America is the sole country of 194 that has accepted itself from its responsibilities, turned its back on the Paris Climate Agreement and the future and the science. Day 1 of our administration, we signed back up to Paris. We convene the countries of this planet together, the indispensable nation, once again, returning to its role, taking as our inspiration those men and women from the greatest generation, who in the face of the greatest challenge that mankind had yet seen at that point, did everything they could that we could have asked from them. And we look back on them with pride. I think about my kids in the year 2050, who will not even be my age, looking back on us, the people of 2019 and 2020, wanting them to feel pride in what we did while we still had the chance to do it. Now this, again, is not something that any one person or any one political party can solve. We must ensure that we bring this country together, rural and urban communities alike, Republican and Democrat, a shared fate and future, a shared challenge that we must accept together. Perhaps this moment of greatest peril, at least in my lifetime, produces the greatest potential and our greatest ability to live up to our promise as a country. For all of these challenges and the ways in which we can meet them together, I'm running to serve you as the next President of the United States of America. And I am grateful to you for the chance to be with you tonight, to be able to not just introduce myself, but to answer your questions, find out what's on your mind, gain the benefit of your best ideas, your experiences, those things that you want to share. So to Mayra, to Bill, to Representative Rivers, who is here as well, to each of you who've taken some time out of your life to spend it with us for your democracy and for the future of this country, thank you, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. Thank you all very much. And I'm going to ask Cynthia.
If you raise your hand, I will come to you. If you have a question, you raise your hand, I will come to you. Let me see, over here.
Hi, Beto. Thanks for being here. Regardless of who wins the nomination in the party, and I'm an independent, and I don't want to see Donald Trump reelected. You're the first candidate that seen personally this time around. I like what I hear. You're a very impressive guy, very knowledgeable guy. My fear is that the divide in the party now between progressive and traditional Democrats, I don't want to see the Tea Party situation happen. Whoever is there, you have to unite the party, otherwise we will lose. And from where I stand right now, I'd like to see you be the guy. But I also want to know how are you going to unite the party, because I think that's the most crucial thing we're looking at, because you can't do the rest without that.
Thank you for the question. First of all, I hope that we can all agree and maybe even pledge ourselves tonight that come summer 2020, whoever the nominee, whoever he or she may be, we get behind them and help them defeat Donald Trump. But just as importantly, we get behind them to ensure that the first day in office, January of 2021, that next president, whoever she or he may be, is as successful as possible, that we bring a movement, a country behind that person, because the challenges are too great to do anything else. And so you will see me campaign in that way. I will never denigrate or demean or bring anybody else down. We are so lucky to have the field that is running today, the most diverse, the smartest, really extraordinary group of people, and I count myself lucky to be able to run among them, and I'm looking forward to you having the chance. And I like that you're still making up your mind. I think you should listen to everybody and have the chance to ask them questions at town halls like these and find out where they are. But let's ensure that we place a premium on trying to bring this country together, because if it is just the victory of one party over another, I fear that at this very divided moment, we will only exacerbate the divisions and make it that much harder to come together around the true challenges. So that's the way that I'll campaign. That's the way that I would serve. And I will just tell you this. I was 6 years in the House of Representatives. Every single day, a Democrat in the minority. The only way that I got anything accomplished, expanding mental health care access for veterans, protecting public lands in my home state of Texas, investing in our ports of entry, our connections with the rest of the world, so that we are safer here at home and that we facilitate legitimate trade and travel between our countries. I had to do that with a Republican colleague, and I had to do it in part because every single month I held town hall meetings like these in my community, all comers welcome, no holds barred. You could come to that meeting if you loved me, and my mom often did. Mom joke for you guys. But you could also come, and more importantly, if you were disappointed in a vote that I had taken, or wanted me to explain a position, or you yourself had an idea that you wanted to turn into legislation. So we're going everywhere. We're not writing anybody off. We're not taking anyone for granted. Tomorrow we're going to be in Denmark. And the state representative from that area said that no one ever comes to this community. There's not enough attention paid on rural America. So often, I'll tell you this from another state that people wrongfully believed was red in Texas. Whole communities felt written off because no Democrat had shown up in decades. And because Democrats don't show up, Republicans don't have to either, and those folks are not represented. We're gonna go everywhere for everyone, every single day of this campaign. Thank you.
Let's go! Let's go!
I think I'm up. Okay, Beto, thank you so much for coming and talking tonight. I thoroughly enjoyed your speech and appreciate it. So I'll be honest, I'm a 26-year-old guy and I've never voted in a presidential election. And I'm not proud of it, but I guess my question for you is why should I change that? Why should I go to the polls next year and vote for you?
Thank you for the question. You're a very brave man to admit that here, but we're glad that you're here. We know that you're gonna vote in this next one. Listen, this community is proof of what happens when people decide that they're going to vote. They may not have voted for 20 years. They may never have registered to vote. They may have dropped out. Our democracy today, so captured by special interests, so corrupted by those who can pay for access and outcomes, invites our disengagement. And I don't blame people who have disengaged. The onus is on me as a candidate, on all of us, to make sure that we understand that our democracy can still work. But you proved that with Joe Cunningham in his last election. So you're turning out. Help to get Joe elected. And I'll tell you what, before I came to South Carolina on our first visit a couple of weeks ago, Joe was one of the first calls that I made, and that guy is working his tail off for you all every day. First words out of his mouth is, Beto, if you become president, you're gonna work with me to ensure that there is no oil drilling off the coast of South Carolina. That guy ran on that issue, and your participation, or this community's participation in that election, ensures that your priority of protecting your coast, and by extension your communities, and by extension the people who live here, is going to be made possible. But I gotta make sure that we all understand there are a lot of our fellow Americans who have been effectively written out of this democracy so far. My home state, Texas, 50th in voter turnout before 2018, not because we like our democracy any less, but because the state legislature drew people out of congressional districts based solely on their race and their ethnicity. Racial gerrymandering, where members of Congress choose their voters instead of the other way around, is alive and well in this country. I guarantee you that if we end gerrymandering by having citizen-led redistricting commissions, if we get big money out of our politics, if we have same-day voter registration and automatic voter registration, and if we sign into law a new Voting Rights Act, then we will make sure that we truly once again return to, or first achieve it because we were never there, one person, one vote in this country, and that vote, your vote, will matter more than ever. So thank you for being here, and thanks for the question.
Thank you for coming to South Carolina. One of the Democratic candidates, and I do forget which one, has proposed a sort of Marshall Plan for Central America to get to the cause of the problem rather than arguing about the fallout. What do you think about that possibility?
We have been calling for at least a doubling of what we're spending in the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras right now. You may know that in the last years of the President Obama administration, we increased our aid to those three countries from where it was, I think, $250 million to $500 million. You may also know that our current president wants to zero it out, literally, and somehow the logic follows that there would be fewer people fleeing that country now. But you know that there will be more, which begs the question of his motivation and why he seeks to do it at this moment. And if you want to think about the context or the perspective of this, whether it's $500 million, whether it's $1 billion, whether it's $3 billion, even that would be a tenth of what the president wants to spend on a 2,000-mile wall, which, by the way, will not be built on the true international boundary between the United States and Mexico, which is the center line of the Rio Grande River channel. It'll be built miles, in some cases, into the interior, forcing you and me to take our fellow Americans' ranches and homes and farms, a solution in search of a problem, because you know who's showing up. It is kids, my kids' age, your kids' age, sometimes, if they are lucky, with their parents. Having just traveled 2,000 miles, what would compel you, ask yourself, to make a 2,000-mile journey with your kid, or to send your 6-year-old daughter on her own? It would only be if that were the only choice left to you to protect or to save her life. And no wall is going to keep out that level of desperation or keep us from meeting our commitments under our own asylum laws to the rest of the world. So yes, invest in those countries, every dollar invested in violence reduction in the Northern Triangle countries reduces what we spend to bring in asylum seekers into this country and prevents those young kids and their parents from even making the journey in the first place. So yes, let's invest in the Northern Triangle countries of Central America and reduce the need to flee. Thank you. I'm looking for Cynthia Cano, who's got the microphone.
Sorry, back here.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm Bill Copley. I'm a retired immigration officer. I'm a bit ashamed to say the high point of my career was I never kidnapped a child. I used to give them coupons to a local restaurant in Oakland, California for a half-price chunk of ultimate chocolate cake, and the restaurant honored them. I would like, maybe not in your first day, but first week or so, to require USCIS to make an actual electronic record with a written copy to the parent that when they naturalize and their child is under 18 and lawfully admitted, by law that child is a citizen immediately without paperwork. We need to record that so when ICE tries to pick them up, they know not to do it.
Bill,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you for telling your story, which helps to provide an alternative to the way that we are treating these kids and these families and our fellow human beings right now. As Bill is alluding to, those kids, those mothers at their most desperate moment, that child literally torn from her breast, in many cases by force if necessary. You can think about the trauma that we are visiting upon that family, and especially the cruelty and the torture endured by that child. And you talk to public health experts and psychologists and psychiatrists, and they talk to these kids even after they've been reunited with their moms and dads, and there is something missing. And I've been there when they've been reunited, and there is something that is not there in their face. There's not an expression of joy. They're not tears running down their cheeks because they're seeing their mom and dad again. They're not like my 8-year-old son, Henry, who, when I've been on the road for a while, cannot wait to tell me what he's been up to, what he's done at school, the new friend that he's met on the playground. There is nothing. No communication, no connection, because that child associates her mother, who she may not have seen for months, with the greatest sadness or torture or grief or pain that she's ever felt, and she does not want to open herself up to feeling it again. Compound that by the fact that, as Bill suggests, we have failed to keep track of these families when we have separated them. We've deported the mom back to the very country from which she fled. That child may be in the custody of Health and Human Services, Office of Refugee Resettlement, or a foster care home in Michigan. Literally, God only knows. And so, beyond ensuring that we never torture kids like this again, as the president is threatening to do right now, we must also ensure that we reunite every single one of those families without delay, spare no expense, pay any price to get it done, and then honor our commitment to our fellow human beings. Thank you, Bill. Ms. Connell.
Hi there, my name is Lisa, and I'm an ACLU Rights for All volunteer. I wanted to thank you so much for visiting the Low Country. We believe that women from all walks of life, rich or poor, should have equal access to reproductive health care, including abortion. I just have a two-part question. The first part is, should you be elected, will you fight to overturn the Hyde Amendment? And secondly, what is your personal plan to defend a woman's right to choose?
Thank you for the question. So earlier I used this phrase, universal, guaranteed, high-quality healthcare. That means every single person. That means the highest quality, You're not treated differently because of your fortune, your fate, your finances. And it means that it's guaranteed. So even if you have insurance today, we know far too many people who cannot get care. They can't afford their premiums or their deductibles or their co-pays. And in Texas, where our state legislature shut down more than a quarter of our family planning clinics, too many women cannot get a cervical cancer screening, cannot get any family planning help, cannot see a provider at all in a state that has not expanded Medicaid. And it shouldn't surprise us that we're at the center of a maternal mortality crisis that is 3 times as deadly for women of color. And this is not right. And you ask, how will I work, or how can we talk about this, or how can we lead, how can we bring people together? No one that I've listened to in Texas, no matter how Republican or Democrat, pro-life or pro-choice, thinks that that's all right, or is okay with the fact that Texas now leads the country in the rate of repeat teen pregnancies. We make it harder for young women to get family planning help, to make informed decisions about their own bodies. We get the unintended consequences. And so for the health and life of the mother, the well-being of the family, and the fact that since 1973, the law of the land is that every woman should be able to make her own decisions about her own body. Universal health care means women have the right to choose. And so yes, I would support overturning the Hyde Amendment to make sure that every woman, especially those who may be dependent on government support for their health care, are able to lawfully access an abortion or reproductive health or one of those cervical cancer screenings that I just talked about at a Planned Parenthood clinic. So thank you for standing up and asking the question. Appreciate it.
Okay, I'm over here to your right. Over here. And I'm really sorry, I know there's a lot of hands up, but I only have time for 2 more.
Hi, Beto. I just want to say it's really cool to be here. So especially with current events, Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be Prime Minister of Israel again. And I know that when you were in the House, you voted against defense spending for Israel and their missile programs. And I know that you've called for a 2-state solution and a solution with that kind of thing. So as president, what would your approach be to the U.S. relationship with Israel?
Thank you for the question. Let me begin. So you asked a really good question. Let me begin by, this is my first public opportunity to do this, to publicly congratulate Prime Minister Netanyahu on his victory. I may not agree with a lot of what he has done or said, especially recently, aligning himself with far-right, very hateful parties, employing some very racist rhetoric, disavowing functionally the 2-state solution, which, if you care about Israel, and I deeply do, is going to undermine and jeopardize a peaceful, secure future for that state. It will make it nearly impossible for Israel to remain both a Jewish state and a democracy. So I have some serious differences, but our differences should not hold us captive to being able to advance our cause, which is a 2-state solution, our friendship, which is historic with the state of Israel, which must transcend who's in power at a given time, or the party affiliation of the President of the United States. That is an everlasting relationship and friendship. But for the full benefit of everyone in that region, Israelis and Palestinians, then we must ensure that there are 2 states. It is the best long-term guarantee for peace, political stability, and our interests as well as the interests of those 2 peoples being served in that area. So you've got my commitment on a 2-state solution going forward. Thank you. Appreciate it. Cynthia, there you go.
This is going to be our last question.
Okay. Hi, my name is Lydia Pemberton. I'm a USCB student, and I was wondering what your plan is for gun control.
Thank you for being here. This is one of these issues that I hope sooner than later young people will be reading about us and will not be able to believe what is happening in this country. That we will lose more than 30,000 of our fellow Americans to gun violence every year, knowing full well that no other country comes anywhere close to this level of gun violence and death. Meeting with some of the students at Santa Fe High School in Texas who survived the massacre there. Meeting parents who lost their children there. Not only was I able to understand or begin to understand, I will never understand, I hope, their grief and their devastation and their loss, they also came to the table with solutions. They shared with me that those states have adopted universal background checks for every firearm purchase, have seen a near 50% reduction in gun violence. And so if we adopt that and we close the Charleston loophole, which means take as long as you need to make sure we get all the information on whoever attempts to purchase this firearm, which means that we also close the so-called boyfriend loophole. Just because you do not have a legal relationship with this person, if he or she has been abusive or violent with you, that is a material factor in deciding whether they should have a firearm that they can use against you or somebody else. And then there's this. So last spring, Henry comes home from first grade, tells us that school teacher, again in Texas, maybe she's working a second or third job, in Texas on average spends nearly $1,000 out of her own pocket to decorate the classroom, provide supplies when the kid shows up without supplies, but also so often, when there's a child on free and reduced breakfast and lunch, is there to pay for a dinner when there's no dinner waiting at home, or that kid who shows up in the same t-shirt and jeans Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. By Friday, that teacher has bought that kid a new set of clothes because she understands that his ability to learn is connected to his sense of self-worth and his dignity in the classroom. And though she's not paid enough to make ends meet for herself, she's gonna be there for that kid. Henry tells me that his teacher in first grade is conducting an active shooter drill in his classroom where she herds Henry and these other kids who still need to learn how to read and write and add and subtract into a closet and resist the temptation they are taught to open the door when a guy barges in impersonating an active shooter with a firearm. They have to learn how to control themselves so that there's a chance that some of them can survive. Maybe some of you saw this circular that went out to one of the PTAs in the country, where the advice to parents was, if a shooter comes into your child's classroom, have that child make as much noise and distractions and throw books and dance in the air. And one of the parents is like, well, what in the world is that gonna do? And the response is, it'll buy a few seconds and maybe some of those kids will be able to make it out in the ensuing distraction. So this teacher who already sacrifices so much now must envision herself being the one who stands between those kids and that shooter coming into this classroom, because we have not found that we are the wealthiest, the most powerful, the most ingenious country on the face of the planet, the political will to do the right thing in the face of concerted opposition from the NRA and the political action committees and the interests that would keep the status quo. So I want to make sure, though I know this is not the most politically popular thing to say everywhere, that weapons designed, engineered, and sold to the United States military, because they are very good at killing people very quickly and in great numbers, should no longer be sold into our communities, so they don't end up in our schools, in our concerts, in our churches, in our public spaces. And my message to you, there are many responsible gun owners here in this state, back home in Texas, who own AR-15s. My message to you is, if you own it, continue to use it responsibly and safely. Nobody wants to take anyone else's guns. All I'm saying is we don't need to sell more of them into our communities without expecting them to show up in our schools and in our public life. I don't think this is too much to ask for us, this country, to save more lives in this country. So thank you for raising the point. Thank you all for having us out. It is a huge honor to be with you. We will